but it's fine. Just let's brush our teeth, pee, put some shoes on, and leave because my driver's in my...
It's becoming harder and harder to deny that Rachel Zegler has turned into one of the most disliked figures in Hollywood. What started as excitement over Disney's long-awaited live-action remake of Snow White has now collapsed into controversy, frustration, and even ridicule. The central issue isn't just the film itself, it's the way Zegler has presented herself. Her public persona, dominated by extreme woke talking points delivered in a self-righteous tone, has alienated huge segments of audiences. She doesn't come across as progressive or inspiring. Instead, her commentary feels condescending, arrogant, and at times, outright bizarre. For many, this has transformed her into a symbol of everything wrong with modern Hollywood. The problems with Snow White began even before cameras finished rolling. In early press appearances, Zegler mocked the original animated film, calling it outdated and dismissing its iconic love story. She even suggested that the prince was essentially a stalker, reducing one of Disney's most beloved romances into something creepy and problematic. Fans were quick to call her out, pointing out the hypocrisy of starring in a project she openly ridiculed. The optics were terrible. Why take on a role you clearly don't respect? Things only worsened when news broke that Disney had decided to erase the 7 dwarfs from the story, replacing them with a collection of magical creatures. The studio insisted it was a modern update, but critics, including actor Peter Dinklage, slammed the move as misguided. Instead of offering authentic representation to performers with dwarfism, Disney sidelined them almost entirely. Ironically, the decision erased the very group the film could have uplifted. Audiences felt it was pandering at best, insulting at worst. As Dinklage argued, there is still power in seeing 7 people with dwarfism in a major Disney movie. If the story itself was problematic, it could have been rewritten. But instead, the characters were stripped away, leaving behind what many saw as a hollow, performative gesture. And then there's Zegler herself. Rather than responding with humility or understanding, she doubled down. She openly told people who disagreed with her to simply unfollow her, and dismissively claimed she didn't need their support. That kind of arrogance struck a nerve. The truth is, she might not think she needs the audience, but Disney certainly does. A billion-dollar studio can't afford for its lead actress to alienate the very fans they rely on. Yet Zegler has carried herself as if the film revolves around her personal views, not the legacy of Snow White. Critics have even gone so far as to call her casting one of the worst decisions in the history of Hollywood blockbusters. Her interviews didn't help either. Zegler frequently drifted into strange, unfocused rants, linking her role to feminism, the patriarchy, and even broader issues like abortion rights. But rather than sounding empowered or thoughtful, her comments came across as confused and unstable. For many, she embodied Hollywood's broader reputation for out-of-touch, fragile egos who mistake personal grievances for moral crusades. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, Disney was facing chaos. Leaks and early reports exposed production problems that executives desperately wanted to keep quiet. Footage and details that slipped out painted a bleak picture. The film was unwatchable, bloated with awkward changes, and carried none of the charm of the 1937 classic. What was meant to be a crown jewel in Disney's catalog was turning into a disaster before it even hit theaters. Then came the moment that truly shocked audiences. In one interview, Zegler insisted she should be paid for every single hour that the film streams online, her reasoning being that she had to spend 18 hours a day in costume during production. Instead of inspiring sympathy, the comment made her look greedy and entitled, especially at a time when families are struggling with rising prices and entertainment costs. Fans who once might have been curious about the film now saw its lead actress as completely disconnected from reality. The backlash was swift, and Disney moved into damage control. Industry insiders claim that the studio has already begun quietly pulling Snow White merchandise from shelves. Unlike normal clearance sales or discounted bundles, the products simply vanished. Dolls, costumes, and themed toys were boxed up, removed from websites, and in some cases even destroyed outright. For a company that depends heavily on merchandising, this is an extraordinary sign of how dire the situation has become. When Disney decides it's better to eat the loss than to keep merchandise on shelves, you know the brand is in serious trouble. And if the merchandise fiasco wasn't enough, the early screenings told the same story. Theaters that once would have expected families to fill every seat sat nearly empty. Reports surfaced of screenings with just 2 people in attendance, a humiliating turnout for a film attached to such a famous brand. What should have been a global celebration of one of Disney's most iconic stories instead became a ghost town, with fans openly mocking the project online. All of this paints a bleak picture not just for Rachel Zegler, but for Disney itself. Once the most trusted name in family entertainment, the studio now faces accusations of pandering, mismanagement, and tone-deaf decision-making. What was supposed to be a bold reimagining of a classic fairy tale has turned into a cautionary tale about arrogance, entitlement, and how quickly public goodwill can evaporate. Rachel Zegler may have thought she was leading a new, empowered version of Snow White, but instead she has become one of the most unlikable stars in Hollywood, dragging the film down with her. The saddest part? Instead of inspiring a new generation, this remake is destined to be remembered as one of Disney's most embarrassing failures. Rachel Zegler just keeps making things worse for herself and for Disney. Every time she tries to defend the Snow White remake, every time she pushes her own agenda onto the public, the backlash grows stronger. What should have been a fairy tale revival has turned into a corporate nightmare. One that not only frustrates Disney's leadership under Bob Iger, but also chips away at whatever remains of the company's once golden image. For decades, Disney's princess films weren't just movies. They were cultural landmarks that shaped childhoods, sold billions in merchandise, and set the standard for family entertainment worldwide. Snow White was supposed to be the crown jewel of live-action remakes, a guaranteed hit destined to dominate box offices and retail shelves. But instead of celebrating the magic of the past, Disney now finds itself quietly erasing the project from existence. Reports suggest merchandise has been pulled from stores, boxed up in warehouses, and in some cases outright destroyed. There was no clearance sale, no last chance bundle, just a silent erasure as if the company hopes the world will forget this misstep ever happened. The collapse didn't start on release day. It began months before, during Rachel Zegler's infamous press tour. Instead of charming audiences, she handed critics and social media an endless supply of clips to ridicule. She laughed about never watching the original 1937 classic. She dismissed it as outdated and creepy. She mocked the prince as nothing more than a stalker and insisted the new film would fix those old-fashioned ideas by making Snow White a leader who doesn't dream of love. While Disney may have thought this would sound modern and empowering, audiences felt insulted. Side-by-side comparisons of the graceful, innocent 1937 princess with Rachel's snarky commentary spread like wildfire. For many longtime fans, this wasn't a bold reimagining. It was a cheap attempt at tearing down the original. By the time the film actually premiered, audiences weren't walking into theaters with nostalgia and excitement. They were armed with receipts, memes, and a strong sense of resentment. And in many cases, they didn't walk into theaters at all. Then came the moment that solidified Rachel's reputation as out of touch, the infamous royalties comment. In what was supposed to be a casual, lighthearted discussion about streaming, Rachel suddenly declared, with complete seriousness, that she should be paid every single time someone watches Snow White online. She explained that she had worked long hours on set, often spending up to 18 hours in costume as the princess, and that this entitled her to ongoing payment for each stream. The internet erupted. Fans, critics, and casual viewers alike were outraged. Here was a young actress, already starring in a multi-million-dollar Disney production, openly complaining about compensation before the film had even premiered. To many, the quote revealed her true priorities: the paycheck, not the character. The backlash was immediate, with parody videos, sarcastic posts, and countless memes tearing apart her comments. For an actress trying to position herself as relatable and empowering, she instead came across as greedy, privileged, and completely disconnected from reality. Even her co-star Gal Gadot seemed to notice. During joint interviews and appearances, Gal's body language was telling. At the Oscars, when the two presented together, viewers picked up on the stiffness. There was no eye contact, no warmth, and certainly no chemistry. Gal forced a polite smile, delivered her lines, and quickly stepped away. Insiders later revealed that Gal had already distanced herself behind the scenes, fulfilling her contractual obligations but avoiding unnecessary interaction with Rachel. For someone as image-conscious as Gadot, being linked to a PR disaster wasn't worth the risk, and her silence spoke louder than any public statement.
Hi. Oh God, my phone's falling. I had the best day, just the best. Nico?
All of this created a perfect storm. Instead of positive buzz, Disney found itself drowning in criticism, with Rachel at the center of it all. The company's gamble on rebranding Snow White as a modern feminist tale had backfired spectacularly. What should have been a celebration of an iconic character became a symbol of arrogance, division, and poor decision-making. And then there's the rewrite fiasco. Disney, desperate to salvage the project, reportedly tinkered with the script, trimming scenes and even re-editing portions of the film after the backlash. But by then, the damage was done. No amount of late-stage editing could erase the months of negative press or the perception that the lead actress had mocked the very story she was supposed to honor. What makes the whole situation even more surreal is Disney's response. Instead of owning the failure or attempting to reframe it, the company seems to be pretending it never happened. Merchandise disappears. Promotion dries up. Executives stay quiet. It's as if the once proud studio would rather bury the film entirely than risk more embarrassment. In the end, the story of Rachel Zegler and Disney's Snow White isn't just about a bad casting choice or a poorly received movie. It's about what happens when arrogance collides with legacy. Disney underestimated the power of nostalgia, misread the audience, and put its faith in a star who alienated more fans than she won. The result is one of the most infamous flops in modern Disney history, a film that audiences don't just dislike, they openly mock. Rachel Zegler may have thought she was redefining a fairy tale for a new generation. Instead, she became the face of its downfall. And Disney, once the master of happily ever after, now finds itself grappling with a nightmare of its own making. Rachel Zegler championed a new kind of Snow White, one without a prince, without romance, and without dwarfs. She promoted it as a feminist reimagining designed for a modern audience, but fans weren't buying it. The original tale, cherished for nearly a century, had endured because of its timeless charm, not because it needed to be turned into a lecture. Yet Rachel pitched her version as if it were fixing something broken, and the backlash was immediate. She argued that Snow White's name had nothing to do with her skin, but rather with surviving a snowstorm. She spoke passionately about fairness being internal, about treating people kindly and carrying goodness in your heart. On paper, it sounded poetic. In practice, it came across as hollow branding, a buzzword-laden attempt to retrofit empowerment into a story that never asked for it. To longtime fans, it wasn't an evolution of the character. It was a demolition of what made her special. The magic was stripped away, replaced by a moral that felt forced. Instead of wonder, audiences felt like they were being lectured. Disney has always been skilled at blending heart with message, creating stories that resonate across generations. But this time, they missed the mark, and Rachel became the face of that miss. Her interviews, her commentary, her attitude all compounded the problem. By the time Disney realized how damaging the press cycle had become, it was too late. No amount of rebranding or late-stage edits could salvage what audiences already believed. This remake was doomed. It's rare for Disney to effectively abandon a release, but with Snow White, they recognized the danger. Streaming it widely could have done more harm than good, cementing its status as an embarrassment. And so the company quietly began burying it. Theatrical momentum collapsed, merchandise disappeared from shelves, and the movie that was meant to relaunch a franchise instead became a cautionary tale. Rachel Zegler, rather than stepping into Hollywood royalty, stepped into infamy. By the time the film limped into theaters, the damage was irreversible. Disney's brand was bruised, fans were livid, and Rachel had become more famous for her controversies than her performance. And as it turned out, that was only the beginning. Because Snow White didn't just flop, it detonated. With a weak $45 million opening and a humiliating 1/6 rating on IMDb, the film didn't stumble out of the gate. It face-planted in full view of the world. And the worst part? No one was surprised. The collapse was treated less like a shocking failure and more like a scheduled event. From the day Rachel's casting was announced, audiences had warned Disney this was the wrong direction. When the failure arrived, it was met not with sadness, but with mockery. Memes flooded timelines. Reaction videos appeared before opening weekend had even finished. Fans who loved the original didn't just skip this remake. They openly celebrated its downfall. Disney had accidentally created the first anti-fairy tale fairy tale. Not a clever subversion, not a bold reinvention, but a public rejection of the company's arrogance. A slow-motion train wreck dressed in a princess gown. Then, in the middle of the chaos, came a bizarre twist. An AI-generated Rachel Zegler profile appeared on OnlyFans, quickly racking up thousands of followers. It wasn't real, it wasn't verified, but for a moment the internet hesitated. Could it actually be her? That hesitation alone spoke volumes. Rachel's reputation had entered such a strange space, equal parts infamous and fascinating, that people genuinely wondered if this was her next move. Her defenders dismissed it as a cruel hoax. Her critics gleefully ran with it. Either way, the episode became another punchline, a digital metaphor for a career spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, Disney was in full panic mode. This wasn't just another underperforming remake. This was a full-blown disaster. With ticket sales flatlining and online discourse turning brutal, theaters began doing something unprecedented, quietly cutting Snow White from primetime slots. Matinees were replaced with safer family options. Evening showings were reduced. In some theaters, the film was shoved so deep into the schedule you'd need a flashlight to find it. For a studio that once owned the box office, this was humiliation on a grand scale. And while the movie burned in public, another story from Rachel's past resurfaced: the forgotten Wicked feud. Long before she was cast in Snow White, Rachel had her eyes set on Wicked, gunning for none other than Elphaba. She hinted online, dropped vocal clips of herself singing the songs, and reportedly pushed her way into early conversations with producers. But insiders saw warning signs even then. The same behaviors that would later explode during Snow White, dominating interviews, impulsive comments, clashing with co-stars, were already peeking through. Unlike Disney, Wicked's producers weren't willing to gamble. They quietly shut the door before the damage could spread. Now, Rachel Zegler's career feels frozen in midair, like a fairy tale gone wrong. She went from being the breakout star of West Side Story, a name tied to promise and potential, to being Hollywood's latest cautionary tale. Instead of becoming the face of a new Disney era, she became the face of its most infamous flop. The tragedy for Disney isn't just the money lost or the merchandise destroyed, it's the blow to their reputation. For decades, audiences trusted Disney to deliver magic. With Snow White, they delivered a lecture, and audiences walked away not with joy but with rejection. Rachel Zegler set out to redefine a fairy tale. Instead, she became the symbol of one gone terribly wrong. It's not just that the movie flopped. It's not just that her interviews went viral for all the wrong reasons. And it's not just that her co-star, Gal Gadot, looked like she wanted to disappear every time they shared a stage. It's all of it together, the perfect storm. Poor timing, bad optics, unchecked ego, a total misread of her audience. Every piece of the puzzle stacked against Rachel Zegler until the collapse was unavoidable. What makes it even more surreal is that Rachel doesn't seem to see it. She's still posting, still performing, still insisting on the importance of being heard. But the question now isn't whether she's speaking, it's whether anyone is still listening. The once bright starlet is shouting into an echo chamber. Studios aren't biting, co-stars aren't defending her, fans aren't showing up, and the silence around her career is deafening. Hollywood isn't sentimental, it's strategic. It isn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. It's calculating. And right now, executives are calculating the cost of ever trusting Rachel Zegler with another major franchise. What once looked like a promising career trajectory has become a cautionary tale played out in real time. From Disney darling to digital punchline, her fall from grace didn't happen overnight. It was death by 1,000 cuts, frame by frame, interview by interview, soundbite by soundbite. Each misstep eroded the goodwill she once had, until one of the most anticipated fairy tale reboots of the decade transformed into what feels like a career obituary. And in a bitter twist of irony, Rachel's story doesn't end with a kiss, or a prince, or even a happily ever after. It ends with a warning. A reminder that in Hollywood, being the fairest of them all isn't about rewriting the storybook to fit your image. It's about knowing when to respect the legacy, when to stay humble, and above all, when to stop talking. Because sometimes, the most powerful role you can play in Hollywood is knowing when not to play at all. You can play in Hollywood is knowing when not to play at all.